A win in the war on terror. A jury convicts the highest-ranking Al-Qaeda member tried in the U.S. Catholic organizations band together to file the first class-action lawsuit challenging the HHS contraception mandate. As President Obama meets with Pope Francis this week, our Jason Calvi is at the White House tonight with a history of presidents meeting with popes. And John Paul II's longtime spokesman is the focus of our Saints for Today series. Those stories and much more just ahead on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 26, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick in for Colleen Carroll Campbell. Let's start by looking at news now. A federal jury has reached a verdict in the trial of Osama bin Laden's son-in-law. After 6 hours of deliberation in a New York court, the man who acted as Al-Qaeda's spokesman was convicted of conspiring to kill Americans. Our Wyatt Spencer joins us tonight with the very latest. Wyatt?
Brian, his name is Suleiman Abu Ghaith. He is the highest-ranking Al-Qaeda official or figure to go on trial ever since the September 11th attacks here on trial in the U.S. And now he could potentially face a life-in-prison verdict after the jury reached that guilty verdict. They found him guilty actually on 3 charges. Number 1, conspiracy to kill Americans. Number 2, conspiracy to provide support to a terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda. And number 3, to actually provide that support to the terrorist organization. He has been on trial now for 3 weeks, and while he was in court, he testified about working with Osama bin Laden and his involvement with 9/11 attacks. This week, an assistant U.S. attorney accused Abu Ghaith of acting as bin Laden's messenger right after the hijackings for several months in the fall of 2001. Attorneys showed the jury video of him used to recruit suicide bombers during the same time period. One of those videos, Abu Ghaith said, quote, "The storm of airplanes will not stop." And his defense attorneys had made the case that he was acting as a spokesperson and not organizing or planning any of the attacks. But Brian, it looks like the jury didn't buy that case. His sentencing is set for September 8th. Brian.
A very important development. Thank you, Wyatt. Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. This evening, the Supreme Court is working to decide whether for-profit companies should be exempt from the HHS contraception mandate if the mandate violates the religious beliefs of the company's owners. We covered that story in depth for you yesterday. Tonight we go to Oklahoma, where Catholics are banding together for a different kind of challenge. EWTN's Angela Buckaloo is in Oklahoma City with that story. Angela?
Brian, Oklahoma City-based Hobby Lobby is fighting the mandate, but they're not the only ones. The first ever class action lawsuit against the mandate was filed right here in Oklahoma by the Catholic Benefits Association, an entity that represents both profit and nonprofit Catholic organizations here in Oklahoma, but also across the nation.
All object to providing health insurance that covers contraception or abortive procedures and counseling.
It will be a very sad day for our nation if this right does not prevail.
Archbishop of Oklahoma City Paul Coakley is both the director and vice president of the Catholic Benefits Association and the Catholic Insurance Company. He notes the government did issue an exemption for churches, but says it's not enough.
The government is providing exemptions for the religious entities that they determine are religious enough, such as a parish or a diocese, but it does not provide that same exemption for other Catholic entities.
Such as separately incorporated Catholic businesses, such as retirement centers. The exemption also does not include Catholic business owners who object to the HHS mandate. Both complaints are in the lawsuit.
I think we're seeing a very dangerous precedent being established, and that's what we're trying to resist.
The Archbishop feels confident the courts will agree with him. Still, he asks us all to pray. In Oklahoma City, Angela Buckaloo, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Angela. Just to the north of Oklahoma, in Kansas, a judge rules Planned Parenthood isn't entitled to certain federal dollars. That debate centers around a 2011 law that says health departments and hospitals have to get federal Title X money before specialty clinics. Now, a district judge struck down that law, but an appeals court overruled the decision. Leaders of the Archdiocese of Kansas City and Kansas say they are pleased with that ruling. Well, a lot of people are rushing to sign up for insurance through healthcare.gov before the March 31st deadline. But if it's taking you longer than expected, the Obama administration is saying, don't worry. They're going to add more time for enrollment, but haven't yet set a new deadline. Some say the change is a political move by the administration to get enrollment numbers up so they can claim this as a victory. Well, the Pope was out in St. Peter's Square today for his audience with the public. He spoke out about holy orders, referring to it as a vocation of service. As usual, thousands packed the square and parents dangled their kids by the Pope-mobile as it passed by. 2 little girls dressed in white actually got to kiss the Pope and got his blessing. Of course, the Pope holds his audience every Wednesday morning. It always attracts a huge crowd. Well, he is the bishop who rose to prominence because of the $43 million restoration of his house. Many in the media actually nicknamed him the Bishop of Bling. Now, Pope Francis has officially accepted the resignation of Bishop Franz Peter Thebarts von Elst of Limburg, Germany. He originally submitted his resignation to the Vatican last fall. Homosexuals who want to exchange vows in Michigan are going to have to wait. That's despite an appeals court overturning that state's ban on so-called gay marriage last week. A judge decided today to put that decision on hold while Michigan's Attorney General appeals the case. The Attorney General says if he has to, he will take the fight all the way to the Supreme Court. 3 men assigned to keep President Obama safe have been sent home after a hotel worker reported one of them was drunk and the other 2 did not do enough to address the problem. This happened in the Netherlands ahead of President Obama's visit to that country. This is just the latest scandal for that agency. You might remember the high-profile prostitution scandal involving agents sent ahead of Obama's trip to Colombia. And just last year, an agent left a bullet in a Washington, D.C. hotel room. First Lady Michelle Obama is now returning to the U.S. from China. She, her daughters, and her mother have wrapped up a week-long trip. Part of the day took on a light theme. She took her family to see pandas and also spent time advocating for rights of minorities, including religious minorities. The First Lady had lunch in an area with a lot of tension because of heavy restrictions on Buddhists. You might recall President Obama met with the Dalai Lama last month, despite objections from China. Speaking of President Obama, this week, he is visiting several countries himself. Today, he was in Belgium. He met with the King and Prime Minister of Belgium, as well as EU and NATO officials. Tonight, he leaves for Rome for a meeting with Pope Francis. Tomorrow, our Rome correspondent Alan Holdren will be there as the president arrives at the Vatican. Be sure to watch our coverage tomorrow right here on EWTN News Nightly. Sherif Girgis joins us. He is the author of What is Marriage, and he is really an expert in this area of religious freedom. The president is going to Saudi Arabia, where the kingdom does not tolerate other religions other than Islam. Do you think the president is going to address that issue when he meets with the king there?
Well, I don't know if he will. He certainly has good reason to. It's a country that bans all houses of worship besides Muslim ones, that bans all materials of a religious nature except Muslim ones, and that has political prisoners on charges like blasphemy and apostasy. So there are lots of grounds for bringing something up.
I know you grew up in Delaware here, but you were born in Cairo. What do you know about the atmosphere in that part of the world regarding religion? And I know you've also converted from Coptic to Catholicism.
That's right. All over the Middle East and in surrounding regions, there's lots of trouble, in Egypt in particular, for the Coptic Christians since the fall of the Mubarak regime. And this is something President Obama himself has mentioned in the very recent past at a prayer breakfast, where he talked about abuses in terms of religious liberty in 9 different countries, omitting Saudi Arabia despite the upcoming meeting. So this is something that's certainly not new to any aspect of our diplomacy.
So at a recent prayer breakfast, the National Prayer Breakfast, he addressed this issue. Do you think he could take that to the next level and actually put it before the king?
Well, he did. He put it in the most Catholic terms possible, basically right out of the Vatican Council's documents on this, saying it's a matter that's central to human dignity. And he has good ground for bringing it up in the meeting because of bilateral discussions in 2006 where Saudi Arabia made a commitment to the United States to make certain changes. Whether he will is another matter.
If you were President Obama, what would you do there in Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's going to be a huge balancing factor, but I think there are a couple key moves that the State Department has already requested that Saudi Arabia hasn't made good on to remove violence inciting language out of textbooks in Saudi Arabia, to release some prisoners on these trumped-up religious charges, and to begin to diminish the activity of the police force that disrupts even private religious worship.
Sherif, while you're here, I want to get your take on this. A week from Saturday, a group at Stanford University plans to host a conference on marriage, family, and the media. It's been a rocky road, to say the least. The Stanford Graduate Student Council originally provided funding, then rescinded it because of protests from a homosexual advocacy group called GradQ. They released this statement, quote, "Several of the invited speakers have made disparaging comments against the LGBT community on topics of same-sex marriage, adoption, and our right to be treated equally by businesses," end quote. He went on to say, "Using family values to discriminate the LGBT community is ridiculous. We deserve the right to start happy and loving families, and family values are in no way limited to heterosexual couples." You're going to be speaking at this conference. What are you preparing for?
Well, I'm preparing to do what my colleagues and I do every time that we speak in a context like this, which is make the argument for the conjugal view of marriage, show that the opposite view has deep inconsistencies, and meet opponents at the level of reasons and arguments and invite them to do the same.
Do you think that these groups have any legitimate concern here?
Not at all. They cite safety concerns. My colleague, my co-author, Ryan Anderson, and I, he's the main target of these protests. We've spoken together at over 100 different colleges and universities, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all of the most socially liberal, and there's never been a problem. In fact, there's often been a very positive response. We haven't heard these arguments before. They add a civil contribution to the discussion.
Ryan, of course, has been here on EWTN News Nightly. Do you see this, Girgis, as a free speech issue?
I think it is certainly a matter of the values behind free speech. In California, actually, there's good reason to think that what Stanford did when it imposed temporarily a kind of tax on the group and asked it to pay $5,600 to pay for 10 security guards for a 120-person conference, that was imposing a kind of tax on unpopular speech, and that in state law in California, that's actually legally problematic. But generally, it does undermine the values that a university is all about.
So is this just a West Coast thing? I know you're pursuing your doctorate at a couple of Ivy League schools. What is the atmosphere in those schools, those universities?
You know, it's a mixed bag, but in a lot of cases, as I said, there's a lot of concern and worry leading up to a talk. But then when people come and they hear that you're willing to engage with them, to reason with them, to hear their objections, and to make your own, it changes the tone very quickly.
Sherif Girgis, thank you. Let me show our viewers your book. It's called What is Marriage? And you can find that, I'm sure, online. It's a great book, and we appreciate you being with us again and look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
All right. Coming up, we go to the Vatican. Rome correspondent Alan Holdren reports on an effort to boost support for the defense of Christians worldwide. And Jason Calvi is at the White House tonight with a fascinating history of meetings between popes and U.S. presidents. Thank you for watching EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Journalists have been busy in the U.S. this week covering the HHS mandate at the Supreme Court. One American group has gone all the way to Rome to help reporters who cover the Vatican understand the legal aspects of complicated issues, from religious freedom to defense of life and the family. EWTN News Nightly's Alan Holdren has that story from Rome tonight.
Between worship and meetings with high-profile Catholics this week, the U.S.-based network of lawyers called Alliance Defending Freedom is working to boost its defense of Christian values on the world stage.
We're in Rome this week for an international media symposium to educate media about the legal issues that are threatening human dignity, religious liberty, the sanctity of life, the future of the family.
From the legal courts to this hotel in the middle of the Eternal City, their symposium aims to give a closer look at the reality of threats to Christian life in the West.
Several years ago, we received an emergency call for help about a Christian pastor of a tiny evangelical church in Sweden. His name was Pastor Aki Green, and he had actually been charged with the crime of hate speech for preaching a sermon directly from the Bible in his own church to his own congregation. He had been tried, convicted, and sentenced to jail. In joining the defense team, we recognized that if hate speech laws could be used to muzzle the church in Sweden, then copycat prosecutions would certainly come about elsewhere in Europe in Canada, the United States, and even Latin America.
In my long life, I have participated in the movement of Solidarność. And I have seen people who have given their life for their faith, for their God, and for freedom.
The Alliance Defending Freedom is made up of more than 2,000 lawyers, united by the common objective to safeguard Christian values in law. With this conference, they'd like to shed light on what they're achieving.
If our work is invisible and nobody knows about it, then our successes are not reported. But it's very important that when we have a success, that it's written about in the Christian media, Catholic and evangelical, and unless they know about it, we remain silent.
From its founding in 1994, the Alliance has been mostly off the mainstream radar, advocating for the right of people to freely live out their faith in America and around the world. Alan Holdren in Rome, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Alan. As we mentioned earlier, President Obama meets Pope Francis for the first time at the Vatican tomorrow. It will be the 28th time an American president visits a pope. Our Jason Calvi is at the White House tonight, where some of those meetings actually took place. Jason?
Well, Brian, Pope John Paul II was the first Holy Father to come here to the White House back in 1979. Pope Benedict was here in 2008. But the long history of popes meeting presidents goes back 95 years. They laugh and give gifts. They talk.
Sir, how nice of you to receive me.
And pose for photos. The Pope gives an address, sometimes with a microphone and sometimes standing. The First Ladies often wear the traditional black veil called a mantilla. And sometimes even the President helps with the Pope's clothes. President Woodrow Wilson was the first president to meet a Pope back in 1919. The next visit was 40 years later, in 1959. President Dwight Eisenhower met Pope John XXIII. JFK, the first and only Catholic president, met Pope Paul VI in 1963. Paul was the first pope to visit the United States. President LBJ was there in 1965. And in 1979, Blessed John Paul II made history with the first papal visit to the Carter White House. President Reagan and JP2 fought communism together. It was under Reagan that the U.S. and the Vatican set up formal diplomatic relations.
Very nice.
We honor you for helping to lead a revolution of values and spirit in Central Europe and the former Soviet Union, freeing millions to live by conscience.
President George W. Bush has the record with 6 papal meetings with Popes JP2 and Benedict.
I do care about the opinions of people, particularly someone as profound as the Holy Father.
Thank you so much.
And President Obama met Pope Benedict at the Vatican back in 2009. Come tomorrow, he'll become the second president to meet 2 popes. President Obama has long looked forward to this meeting with the Holy Father, and he admires Pope Francis's leadership. Brian?
And Jason, is there any word on what these two will talk about when they meet tomorrow?
We don't know exactly what they'll talk about, Brian, but what the White House says is that the president is looking forward to hearing about what they call the ambitious plan of Pope Francis's first year.
All right, of course, our Vatican correspondent will be there. Thank you, Jason Calvi at the White House tonight. Up next, the way we get our news has changed dramatically in the past few years. We'll take a close look at the new data from a Pew study on media. And we'll feature a man who served as a liaison between Pope John Paul II and the media for 2 decades in our Saints for Today series. You're watching EWTN News Nightly for this Wednesday, the 26th of March. Pew Research Center's annual State of the News Media report is out today. It takes a look at the landscape of American journalism, including how it's funded and how the internet is really shaking things up. For one, digital media outlets have exploded onto the news scene. Rupert Murdoch's Vice Media now has more than 1,000 staff members. Social news site BuzzFeed went from half a dozen employees in 2012 to 170 today. U.S. adults also are getting news from social networks. Nearly 1/3 of Americans now get their news through Facebook. And what about the money being made in the news industry? Pew reports newspapers are still bringing in the majority of revenue at $38 billion. No other sector, including television news, even hit $10 billion. The report shows advertising is still the main source of funding for news operations. But in a development that Pew calls a signpost toward future funding methods, new money from tech investors and philanthropists come onto the scene last year. We're joined tonight by two journalists to discuss this. Kevin Loker from the American Press Institute, Tim Carney from the Washington Examiner. So, Kevin, more news is being consumed online. Even big names like Katie Couric are now anchoring online newscasts. What do you make of this trend, and is it something that we will see growing?
Yeah, well, the demand is there. More and more people are getting comfortable with consuming news across devices. They're not just reading things in the newspaper, they're comfortable looking at news on their phone, discovering it through social media, and I do see the demand growing over time. And the cool thing about this report is showing that there's a lot of energy there. The digital startups are figuring things out, and the newspapers are starting to adopt strategies to take some of the best of what the digital startups are doing and bring them into their legacy organizations.
I would think more people are actually following news because it's so much easier. And you come out of the print world. I mean, the Washington Examiner used to be a daily newspaper. What do you think is happening with the newspapers? They're clearly still taking in the bulk of the revenue, but how long can that last?
They're taking in the bulk of the revenue, but the trend is not an upward trend, and especially not in the employment situation. They're shedding lots and lots of reporter jobs at big companies like the Tribune Company. So the question is, they will have to adapt to what print can do particularly. So print does a big display ads with the models and that sort of thing for Saks Fifth Avenue or whatever that don't work as well online. And print can do sort of the long read type stuff, what you might read in New York Times Sunday edition. And the Examiner now prints a magazine where we do more of the long, deeper reads. So print has to adapt and say, what can we do now that the web and TV can't do as well? So it'll be a much smaller print universe in the future, but it'll still always be there.
So now you are a weekly magazine, and yet your presence is always there online. Do you see that as a model that seems to work?
Absolutely. I mean, we are an online publication. I write for the internet, and then we convert that stuff into web stuff. And I do think that anybody basically has to be online and digital first, and then see what else can we produce for the people who want to consume it while holding it in their hands.
Now, recently some tech investors and even philanthropists have gotten into this game, putting money into digital media. Do you guys see that as a trend, as Pew sort of pointed out?
It's an indication that people care a lot about the news. It's still a very small percentage. We in D.C. know that Bezos has put money into the Washington Post, and we pay a lot of attention to that. It's still a relatively small portion of the pie. I think it's like 1% that the Pew report talks about for that particular thing. But it's an indication that people still care about the news. They want to see these things that are going through disruption, these papers like the Post that are going through disruption, succeed. And there are more than just funders coming in and giving money to papers and other places are experimenting with events to raise revenue, how to bring people together and do journalism kind of in real life. And that the report talks about that as well, and there's a lot of indications of figuring things out in a different way and financing news with not just the news product.
How do you guys see us in the news media adapting to the fact that so many people are now getting their news through Facebook?
Well, I mean, this is something that right now newspapers, websites, they hire sort of a Facebook guy to try to post stuff on Facebook. I don't know how well that model works, but some of it is going to have to be the type of content produced. And so you see websites popping up that are dedicated to producing sort of, this is shareable status. Either here's the worst person in the world being mean to a kid, or here's the most inspirational story about the kid who saved his uncle's life or something. That there's more content being produced for that. As far as the hard news stuff, I hope there's not too much adaptation towards, what is your aunt most likely to share with a million other people.
Yeah, it's kind of a gray area, and this, of course, is evolving, and we'll look forward to having both of you back on with us to talk more about it. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Well, this week on The World Over with Raymond Arroyo, Russell Crowe talks about his new movie, Noah, and more in-depth analysis of the Hobby Lobby religious liberty case at the Supreme Court. The World Over Live with Raymond Arroyo is on Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN. Well, he worked alongside Blessed John Paul II for more than 20 years, and some credit him with changing the way the Vatican communicated with the media. In our Saints for Today series, Joaquin Navarro-Valls, the former director of the Vatican press office, shares his memories of John Paul II. Our Susie Pinto has the story.
As his press secretary, Joaquin Navarro-Valls traveled the world with John Paul II. The Pope, who will be made a saint in a few weeks, told him where that desire to travel came from.
He told me once when I asked him about his trips and why he insisted on them, he said, there was a time when the people came to meet the priest in the parish. Now the priest has to go out to the people. He thought of himself as a priest who was going out to meet the people, and that's why he traveled all over the world.
The medical doctor and journalist says the Polish Pope had a special relationship with the media.
It seemed as if God was being ignored in modern culture. But he got the media to focus on God. You could say the Pope worked with the media.
After more than 20 years as one of his closest aides, Navarro-Valls had the tough task of announcing the death of his beloved boss to the world's media.
The Holy Father, John Paul II, died this evening at 9:37. Viaticum was administered to the Holy Father, and once again, the sacrament of the sick.
We now know that John Paul II's private notes were not burned, as he had asked. Navarro-Valls says that was the right thing to do. And what did he think when he found out John Paul would be a saint?
My reaction was to tell him, once again, thank you, John Paul II, for the masterpiece that you made of your life, and that those of us who were close to you were able to see.
Beautiful story. Thank you, Susie. And thank you for joining us tonight. Please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and you can catch us anytime again on EWTN's YouTube page. I like to watch myself once in a while. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.